Well, I mean, we can't be too far away from the mic. Yeah, you can. You probably have some room. Yeah, put your knees on that side.
No, but I want to be facing this way a little bit.
Like, hello.
Okay. Okay.
Well, help me with your knees.
Okay. And it doesn't record on the podcast as well if we're like talking this way. So I don't know if you want to go like low and come up or what. What do you think?
Thanks for asking me that question, Bob. Is that our first question?
Jeez. Okay, so this is the you hit the blue thing.
Yeah, you hit the blue thing.
Okay.
Wait, we're going to be able to see live stuff there, though, right?
I guess, yeah. Yeah, so try another way of going live during your podcast.
It's live.
I don't know what that means.
When you open the door for somebody else.
Good morning, everyone. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, it's Saturday. I should be, well, I don't sleep in anyway, but you should be sleeping in right now.
Well, I can't sleep in because I have kids. And they get up at 6:30 every morning and have for the last 5 years. There has not been a day of sleeping in the last 5.5 years.
That was my job. I always got up early, so I'd play with the kids for a few hours. Cheryl would sleep
You're
in.
Have to see the questions, you'll have to go to the video.
And Cheryl should be joining us. I don't know, we'll see if she logs on. Good morning, Cheryl.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
So, Cheryl, if you're I did make coffee for you. So if you haven't started it yet, that's our thing.
Nice.
I make coffee for her and leave it ready to brew.
Oh, there we go.
There we are. Woohoo! Hey. Oh, it's like behind.
That's funny.
So is it? I don't know. Okay.
Oh yeah, but can we see our questions through there instead of on the phone? Look under comments.
Comments. Okay.
Sorry, guys, we're using.
Okay, well, yeah, we are totally like this is a well-produced show.
Wait, we're not going to be able to see comments if it's this way.
Okay.
See, it's going to play.
Okay, so
this is funny. You have to turn it the other way, I think, to see comments.
Right.
I believe.
So glad. I better just hit the off button. Okay.
Just bear with us for 1 second.
Good thing Melissa's here.
Okay, you turn it that way, and then I think it gives the. Usually we can see comments. It might take a while to load now, though.
Okay.
Well, I see comments already coming in, and we can only see them on the phone. So actually, I'll check and see if I can see them on my phone better.
Yeah,
the iPad isn't doing its thing. Okay, I see. Oh, we have 21 comments already.
Is there a way to like cut the first 5 minutes of this? Oh, anyway, but let me welcome us into the podcast too, because we are also podcasting. We forgot all about.
Oh yeah, turn your volume down on that too.
You
see the comments.
Down?
Yeah, because it's delayed. See, so you'll hear
it. Okay. Wow. Okay. Anyway, well, welcome in all the podcast listeners. This is a live Q&A on Facebook. So we are answering everyone's questions. People are watching us live, but some of you may be listening to this a week or two from now.
In a month when this finally gets posted.
Yeah, so I know. Anyway, so...
happy Saturday.
Yeah, happy Saturday.
Oh, somebody has a yard sale. Monique, do your thing. Do your thing, girl. She's listening while she's doing a yard sale.
That's
I love that.
So funny. So I can scroll up to the question. Well, why don't we
start with Teresa?
Yeah, Teresa, thank you for chiming in. It's a question about titers. Is it unusual for someone 50 years old who's been vaccinated one time when they were 2 with an MMR to still have a high level of titers or immunity? And I would say that is pretty unusual in that most adults, by the time you're 50, your titers are going to have waned and be very low. But I would say, and you kind of asked this in your question, it's very possible you had exposure to some of the diseases along the way. I mean, you're 50, I'm 50. Hey, happy birthday this year. So when we were kids, I mean, there was rubella, some, and there was mumps around some. And so you might have caught, you might have been exposed to those. You might have been exposed to those as an adult, measles too, maybe. That might have boosted your natural immunity. And that's kind of the way these childhood diseases are supposed to work, including chickenpox. You know, if you get the vaccine, or I guess you get the disease when you're a kid and you're exposed to the diseases later as an adult, you will get a natural boost in immunity. Or if you had the vaccine as a kid and you're exposed later to the disease, you might get like a case of the disease then and get natural immunity that way. But you know what? You could be a great vaccine responder. It's hard to know. It's hard. I think your situation is probably unusual. So I don't think most people would be able to bank on 50 years of immunity from an MMR vaccine given an age 2. But
and as we know, like the measles portion of the vaccine happens to be one of the ones that works a lot better than others. So the fact that it still wanes over time, most other vaccines are going to wane even way before that. So measles is one of the ones that can last on the longer side for people.
Yeah, it can. And then she also asked, does natural infection titer last longer than vaccine titers?
It's a good question.
And yes, yeah. I mean that would be true in almost all cases, but it's also truer if you're exposed to the disease along the way. All right, and you get sort of a natural boost in immunity along the way. We can't re-give the MMR vaccine along the way to almost all adults because the side effects are unacceptable. You know, the risk of rheumatoid arthritis as a side effect, the risk of other autoimmune side effects, and the risk of all the disease complications from the MMR vaccine itself are pretty high when adults get this booster. And so that's why I usually will warn people about boosting with MMR vaccine if you're an adult. Even if you're near an outbreak of measles or mumps or rubella, you might, honestly, there's a lot of risk in getting that vaccine. So you have to talk to your doctor about just living with the disease risk during the outbreak versus trying to boost your immunity with the vaccine.
What about titer actual numbers? Like when people get blood work done on their titers, if you've had the natural infection compared to if you've had even if you've recently had the vaccine, would those numbers be equivalent or would they still always be a little bit lower if it's vaccine induced?
So I was reading the next question. I didn't realize you were asking me a question. I'm so sorry.
My God.
How much do I suck, you guys? And Cheryl's like, welcome to my life.
Geez.
Yes.
Okay,
if she asks me anything and I'm looking at my phone in any manner, it just completely goes by me.
Once again, if you get your blood work done and you have titers checked, would the actual numbers, like whether I don't know if they're in the thousands, hundreds, I haven't done titers, but if you get the blood work checked and even if you've been recently vaccinated, would those numbers still be lower compared to natural infection? Because for what I've heard, it's always higher.
Oh, yeah.
So not even just over 15 years, but even like in the first couple of years after a vaccine, those numbers would still be lower than a wild infection number. I was curious about that.
Yeah, and then I guess I can just, since we're talking about titers, just so everyone knows, if you're trying to improve immunity in order to not do more doses of vaccines in a series, actually, this is blocking the camera a little bit. Sorry. Yeah, so if you're doing titers so you don't need more doses, that only applies to MMR and chickenpox vaccines. Titers are not accepted for all the killed virus vaccines. They're only accepted for live virus vaccines if you're trying to prove immunity. So like if you get 2 DTaps and you're trying to get out of the other 4 doses for school requirements, and you check a titer for diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, it doesn't matter. The school won't accept that titer result as proof of good long-term immunity.
So why is that?
They'll only accept it from live virus vaccines because once you have a positive titer from a live virus vaccine, you are assumed to have very good immunity for decades. Right, but not the killed virus. As you've already said in podcasts, if you have a high titer to the pertussis vaccine, we know that wanes within 2 years. And so a school's not going to accept that because they know within maybe a year even that titer could be low.
What about any of the other killed viruses or killed things?
Move you down, so.
What about any of the other killed things that are not all the other childhood vaccines that are not like? What are you doing?
I'm trying to
Would you stop?
Okay, there we go.
Stop messing with this mic.
Sorry.
Like outside of just pertussis, what else would be an example of something that's not a live virus vaccine that titers would not, because it's not live, would not count, but should if you've gotten it? Because we know pertussis wanes, but what about something else? Yeah,
you know what? Tetanus is a lot more reliable. It should last 10 years, they say, but a school won't accept it. It's their rule. Polio could last 10, 15, 20 years, and they won't accept that either. The hepatitis B, they give hepatitis B vaccine to all babies, hoping they'll have positive titers by the time they are
exposed to hepatitis B.
18 and 20 and 25. Yet they won't. So they're assuming the 3 doses will give you, 30 years of protection, but they won't accept 2 doses of Hep B and a positive titer, even though technically that should be enough. They just won't.
Well, I mean, the positive titer is showing that you have proof of immunity.
Right.
That should be equivalent. Isn't the goal? The goal is to be immune, right? The goal is not to be vaccinated. The goal is to be immune, which we know that there are people that are vaccinated that are not immune, and there are people that are not vaccinated that are immune. Right. If the goal is immunity, that should be really our marker, shouldn't it, for school entry or protection levels or whatever? It should really, everybody should have to prove immunity. If it goes that, because, there's that false sense of security with vaccination that it assumes everybody is immune and immune for a long period of time. Right.
And that's why a natural disease-based herd immunity kind of does give a society longer-term protection as adults. And Andrea Marie asked a question that's sort of a follow-up is, since chickenpox and measles and all those kind of old childhood diseases are less common in kids these days, is it more dangerous to catch these diseases as an adult? And the answer is yes, it is more dangerous to catch mumps as an adult because you have a higher risk of sterility and other complications. Although you have to realize that the complications are still tiny. They're still less than 1%. So it's not like if you're an adult and you catch mumps, you're going to become sterile. I mean, that's extremely rare.
You're a goner.
Yeah, I know. It's just more common for adults because it virtually never happens in kids. Yeah, measles has more complications no, let me rephrase that. Measles doesn't have more complications in adults that I know of. You're just going to feel sicker. You might feel like a lot more achy and feverish and miserable, but I don't know that we have data that shows you have more like brain infections or more pneumonia as in adults, because we know those complications can happen with children, even though they're extremely rare.
We do see more hospitalizations, but that's usually like a preventative or precautionary measure, probably because there's so much fear associated with this now that as soon as somebody gets it, they're like, oh my God, I have to go to the hospital.
Yeah, and chickenpox is more serious in adults. As well, although I don't think the fatality rate is higher if you're an adult. Again, I think you're just going to feel more miserable. Maybe your sores are going to be maybe worse as an adult. But so it's interesting. I think mumps is probably the only one we know that is potentially more severe as far as complications go. But again, it's all tiny. So and I guess a lot of patients will ask me if they don't vaccinate their kids when they're young, should you then vaccinate when they become teens or when they become adults? The problem with that, so that you don't, have the disease as an adult. There's a lot of problems with that approach, though. A couple of the problems. Oh, you know what? No, that light's not on. Never mind. There's problems that I'm gonna maybe take that lampshade off. It's all bright. Anyway, sorry. Back to. The problems with that is getting the vaccines as an adult is riskier. It's just riskier. You have more side effects if you wait until you're an adult to get MMR and chickenpox vaccine. If you get the vaccines when you're like a child, say 8 or 10 years old, before you're an adult, so then you'll have immunity, hopefully for 10, 15, 20 years, that's going to wear off. So you're still going to spend most of your life with no disease immunity. So is it worth getting the vaccines when you're 8 or 10 so you don't catch measles, mumps, rubella, and chickenpox as a young adult, then have the immunity wear off? Is that worth it? I don't know. That's kind of what you have to ask. That's what you have to decide. I would say if you do want vaccine immunity for maybe 10, 15, 20 years, it is better to get those vaccines before puberty.
Yeah, age appropriate.
Yeah, because if you get them after puberty, you have a lot more vaccine side effects and vaccine risk. So either live the rest of your life without vaccine immunity and maybe catch the diseases, or get the vaccine when you're younger, so you're not risking those adult vaccine side effects.
You're just risking the childhood side effects.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, before we go to another question, I want to say hi to a few people that have said hi. April from Atlanta, hi. Hi, Marlene. Hi, Julietta. Alex, you can ask questions here. Ashton, good morning. Pamela, hi. Everybody can see this now. Parisa, I don't know if that's how you say your name correctly, but it's beautiful. Andrea, he talked to you already. Monique, we talked about your yard sale.
Are you going to say hi to everybody?
I sure am.
Okay.
Nicole, we're going to spend the entire time saying hi to everyone. Hi from Encino. Hi, Nicole. And then we have a question here. Good morning from Washington, Lindsay. Watching from Massachusetts right now. Hey, Stephanie.
Are you gonna like?
I will get back. No. I'm just saying hi to the people that I've seen. Good morning, Chris. And then I see a couple other questions. Thank you for speaking up. You are welcome. Okay, so now we're back to questions. I just wanted to get those out of the way because I'm tired. And it's been a long couple of weeks. Yeah. And also, we're not just trying to just go right into disease statistics right at the beginning.
Sorry, well, someone
has. Come on. It's like we have to at least say hi to people and also acknowledge, everything that's going on where everybody is right now, and a lot of bills people are fighting right now. So a lot of people are tired around the country right now. Yeah. And then we'll also talk a little bit about Rockland, what's in the news. Mm-hmm. We'll take some time to talk about that somewhere in this time. Cool. And so keep adding your questions, keep saying hi to us. And that's it. I just wanted to acknowledge everyone out there.
Should we go food allergies?
Yeah.
Yeah. Vaccines and food allergies. The main way that's related, I would say, is that we do know for a fact, and this is not disputable. We do know for a fact that when you get vaccinated, it revs up the allergic part of your immune system, so that your immune system is primed to have more allergic reactions to things. And so that's kind of maybe the main way that food allergies might be related to vaccines. I've had a lot of patients tell me their kids were eating everything and then got, especially the live virus vaccines, and then boom, their next exposure to, say, peanut or anything else, they had this huge allergic reaction where they had peanuts 20 times before that. With no allergic reaction. So that's one way. I think the other theory is that people say there's peanut oil in vaccines. And there's also, we do know, and I can't confirm that. I asked Dr. Thomas Cowan if that was true, and he says he wasn't able to really confirm it either.
I think it goes based to back in the 60s when I told you I found that newspaper article. That actually talks about peanut oil in vaccines. And I think so one of the original cultures that they used did have some exposure. And so I think that's where it comes from, because they continued that particular vaccine for many years after that. And I think, I don't know why I can't remember which one it was, but I found an old newspaper article from that time that actually talks about it, because it, of course, nobody knew anything about the connections between food allergies and vaccines at that time. So it wasn't like, it wasn't being censored, in other words. Like that information was just, okay, there's peanut oil in there. So I know there's definitely a history of it, and things that are continued to be cultured over decades can still have strains of things. I mean, my own thought on this is
Sorry.
This is literally what happens every time we podcast.
All right.
Like,
so there's not like a light shining behind us, right? Am I right? Can you see us better?
Why would you not want to have a light shining behind you?
But then
you're a beacon of light, Dr. Bob. Light is the reason we are on this mission, is to bring light to things. Okay. So I actually didn't mind the light.
Weird. I'm on the phone, but I'm not on the
oh my God,
because of the delay. Well, so can I also say soy is in the pneumococcal vaccine?
Sure, just move on to soy. Right. Let's just ignore that whole issue.
No, sorry. Were you done?
No, but I'm just not that. You're so OCD about these things.
Well, now it looks like we're in different rooms. You're
on the black side, so and I'm there on the white side.
We are in the same room. Anyway, so soy is in the pneumococcal vaccine. So the question is, I'll just keep talking. You can just keep laughing at me. If you get, pneumococcal vaccine at 2 and 4 and 6 months, and you're getting soy proteins injected into you, is that going to raise your risk of soy allergy? I don't know. We don't know the answer. And then cow blood and certain proteins from cow parts are in some of the cell cultures that they use to nourish vaccines. And so if you're getting early injection of cow stuff, even cow heart is in one of the vaccines, could that then prime your immune system to be allergic to cow products like milk, and is that increased milk allergy? These are all great questions that we don't know the answers to, but maybe I I bet the FDA is all over that, researching that as we speak.
Several studies
they will let
right
us
now.
know. Yes.
And they'll definitely report them to the public, just
They
like
completely
unaltered.
will.
So
Right.
the next one's April's with MTHFR.
Okay.
Discussion about, so the question is, are certain genetic mutations for MTHFR gene considered a mitochondrial disorder, being that your ability to make sufficient glutathione is greatly inhibited? For example, homozygous for C677T and compound heterozygous for A1298. Welcome in, she says. Hashtag welcome
That's a hashtag. That's so funny.
I love you, April. That is hilarious. Welcome in. You know what's funny? I was listening to somebody else's podcast, something, and I swear I heard somebody else say welcome in. I was like, oh my God, this is where he gets it from. It's like a podcast thing, I guess. Like, I'm not
Well, I get it from, should I tell you where I get it from?
Yeah.
I get it from the Mark and Linda podcast.
See? It's a podcast thing.
You guys remember Mark and Brian from the KLOS days in LA radio? Do you know? You're
95.5?
Yeah.
Look at me!
Yeah. Mark has a podcast and he likes to welcome everybody in. And I don't know. I listen to him for years.
So corny. Hashtag
shout out
so
to Mark.
corny.
So as if I have no idea that that's corny. I think MTHFR mutations are something that most people have. And so, yes, that probably does interfere with your detox ability. There's no absolute certain evidence that it interferes with how you handle vaccines. There's some evidence of it early. And I guess, since we always like to talk about, vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies, no one's ever done vaccine research on like live, humans, testing how they react if they have MTHFR mutations and testing how those who don't have those mutations react. So we don't know. We can't say that those with those mutations react worse. We just don't know. We don't have the data. And we sort of hold, the pro-mandate side to the same criteria. We want them to have the data if they're going to prove something's right. So I don't think we can yet prove about MTHFR, but it's a good theory, and there's some research that supports the theory. I think if you look at all genetic mutations as a whole, there are a lot of genetic mutations that you can have that there is a lot of research on that shows, if you have this mutation or this mutation or this mutation, not just MTHFR, but a bunch of others, your body is at greater risk of a vaccine side effect, probably. Right. And then, if I think we need more research to prove that MTHFR alone is enough risk. And I don't know that we know that yet.
The bigger point of all of that is the fact that this just highlights that everyone is genetically individual. And the fact that we are all genetically individual, it would make sense. So the theory of genetic susceptibility from what I've researched is basically understanding that we detoxify things at a different level, at a different rate. And that's why for some child, one vaccine can be enough or too much. And for another child, it could take 20 vaccines before they actually start to show signs of it, as if, your body has to eliminate all of the other things that are alongside of your antigen, because it's not just an antigen and saline, right? You have other things and there are other components that, and not just vaccines. We have these same components coming into our life every day through food, water, air. And so the problem is, we all have like a tipping point of kind of when we will start manifesting symptoms based on toxicity. And again, the toxicity comes from lots of different areas. It's not just vaccines. But the problem is, as it's injected, it takes a while for some people to detoxify, and for some others, they don't detoxify. For some that have gut issues or permeability, then there's the option there for those toxins to actually go through the gut and into the rest of the body, where they stay potentially permanently. And that's where we can look at things like neurological issues. I think the fact, regardless of what the particular mutation is, and from what I've read, estimations are very high that a majority of the population has something. I think the fact is that because we're so genetically individual, this is why the idea of mandating this one-size-fits-all program doesn't work, because everybody's going to respond differently. So when you say 49 doses by kindergarten, according to the CDC, that 49 doses is going to look very different for every single child. And for some, it could just be a handful before they're starting to exhibit these particular neurological, behavioral, allergic signs, whatever, autoimmune issues. So outside of there being specific data to show MTHFR, I think there is enough data to show there's genetic susceptibility. We know that.
Right.
And I think the fact that that data exists, and we already know that because we've seen so many cases of this just in real life, see these kind of reactions, that should be enough to sort of be the reason why we cannot mandate any vaccine program, because how can you do that knowing there's going to be a portion of the population that will be harmed? And I just don't feel like there's a way to sufficiently test ahead of time. Because even if you were to test for that particular gene, that doesn't necessarily mean that some other compound of your genetic makeup is going to have a difficulty with that detoxification process. You'll never know until something bad happens. So I've seen people on social media write, oh, there's a simple test you can do. And it's like, there isn't a simple test, first of all, that you can do, and that test is only going to be maybe one aspect. It's not going to be all of them. So I think because there's so much unknown here, there's so much lack of data here, I'm not really sure what gives the power and the authority to mandate anything when you know that this is an issue that we're dealing with. Were you listening or just looking at the next question?
No, I was totally listening.
He's looking at the next question.
No, there's more to this question. She asked also about mitochondrial disorder. She wanted to know if MTHFR is a mitochondrial disorder. And the answer is no. Mitochondrial disorder is way more complex than MTHFR. Yeah, and you can have both, of course, and they can be tied together. But yeah, mitochondrial disorders is where the parts of your cells that generate energy for your whole body to run is completely defective and it's not working well. So when you're totally stressed by something, your body and your brain and your immune system can totally shut down and actually suffer harm because you had so much stress in your body that you couldn't give enough oxygen and blood flow and nutrients to your brain, so you actually can get brain injury from that. And so that's why those with mitochondrial disorders can really suffer serious problems from vaccines, because vaccines will create such a stress on your mitochondria that then you can literally get brain injury. And that's what happened actually in vaccine court, in the omnibus hearings with the autism omnibus hearings in vaccine court. Basically, the first child that they had, that was in the autism vaccine court case, a specialist on mitochondrial disorders testified that this child's vaccines did not cause this child's problems. Vaccines did not cause this child's autism. I think that was Havenhurst was the first case. So then that specialist looked at the next case, and that was the Hannah Pauling case. And Dr. Zimmerman is the specialist. He looked at the Hannah Pauling case and he concluded, oh my gosh, vaccines did cause Hannah Pauling's severe neurological injury. Hannah Pauling has mitochondrial disorder, and vaccines did cause her autistic symptoms and caused her neurologic harm and neurological symptoms. Vaccines were the problem for Hannah Pauling. That never went public. Instead of including Hannah in the autism omnibus proceedings, they basically settled her out of court and they quashed Dr. Zimmerman's testimony. So even though Dr. Zimmerman said the first kid's case doesn't look related to autism and vaccines, Zimmerman said, oh my gosh, the second case does. And then they took Zimmerman off the witness stand. They wouldn't let Zimmerman testify anymore for any further autism vaccine court cases. Zimmerman is Kennedy Krieger, Johns Hopkins neurologist, highly specialized in his field, very well respected, and is very interesting that his testimony in vaccine court totally got thrown out once he realized that, oh my gosh, if you have mitochondrial problems, vaccines can be related to your neurological injury. So then the other theory is mitochondrial disorder is where it's very severe. You can be very severely harmed. There's also mitochondrial deficiency or mitochondrial insufficiency, where your mitochondria they mostly work well enough, but they don't quite work well enough to completely protect you from vaccine side effects. And those kids might be at more risk of vaccine reactions. There's not an easy way to test for that. So again, this falls in the category of we need more data, we need more research so that we can predict who is genetically more susceptible to severe vaccine reactions. And in the meantime, we can't force them on everybody because we know some will be harmed if we do.
I like this question. Linz I'm guessing this is short for Lindsay. Question, I had chickenpox as a kid. When my doctor checked my titers when I was pregnant, she said I had no immunity. Why would that be?
Right, and you would have lost your immunity because you probably did not have any repeated exposure to the disease. The thing about chickenpox is not everyone gets lifetime immunity, and some people it will wear off. And that's actually why our society relies, to get full herd immunity for everybody from chickenpox, you actually rely on natural re-exposure to the disease as you get older. And so if you never were exposed to anyone with chickenpox when you were 10 or when you were 20, then your natural immunity would have waned. So that is one problem with eliminating chickenpox from our society, so that kids are not running around with chickenpox anymore. They're not boosting their adults. They're not boosting their parents and their grandparents. No one's getting boosted. So yeah, that could end up being a concern. The problem is getting the vaccine so that everyone's protected. The vaccine wears off too, and the vaccine causes some pretty tough reactions. And especially the older person's shingles version of the chickenpox vaccine can cause some serious reactions like heart attacks in certain situations. So the whole thing's a big mess. I think that the old fashioned model of just allowing everyone to catch chickenpox so that everyone could get lifetime immunity, that might have been a simpler way to go about approaching this particular disease than throwing a vaccine into the mix. And can I add, there's a doctor who was sorry.
Yes, you can.
Oh, I can? Okay, thank you. There's a doctor who was part of all the original research and development of chickenpox vaccine. I forget his name, but he worked with all the drug companies to make it and to test it. And he has actually spoken out in a lot of criticism, saying how this vaccine has now messed a lot of things up in the manner that I just spoke. So I'm not the only one.
I think overall, people forget that there's sort of like an entire system that works as it relates to disease. And I didn't think anything about this until we started really looking into data recently, and we looked at the Washington measles outbreak and the idea. And still, I just checked their website yesterday. Still to this day, not an infant under 1 year old out of the 75 cases. Right. I mean, that has never happened in the U.S. outbreaks that I've looked at.
Right, because in these communities, all the infants are immune to measles because most of their parents caught measles when they were growing up.
If not all, yeah. I mean, there were no babies under 1. So every other time that we look at outbreaks, we see typically about 10 to 15% of every outbreak will have babies under 1, which they're the ones that are at the highest risk. And so I just saw an interview today where they interviewed one of the Rockland unvaccinated families saying, he said, well, my kids are not a risk to anyone. And then she's countering him saying that's not true, according to authorities who say babies under 1, pregnant women and immunocompromised are the ones that could be exposed. But babies under 1 are only exposed because as women, we don't have the maternal antibodies to pass. We don't have that passive immunity to give to our babies. So in a greater, broader sense, the vaccination program has created the susceptibility for infants, and the same thing with chickenpox. This broader sense of what the entire program has done is it's reduced our ability to have boosted exposure. It's increased the likelihood of people getting adult cases of chickenpox, which are more risky. We obviously have the entire shingles debacle, which their solution was to make another vaccine for it. But people are still getting it through the vaccine. There are a lot of cases in vaccine in VAERS reports as it relates to this. I think when we talk about this argument, it's not just do you or don't you want polio, which tends to be how simplified it gets. There's a lot more that goes into this cycle of disease and how the way that the disease passes through the body and how that makes a difference too. So if we're not getting it naturally through the nose and the mouth, the way our immune system responds is different because it's injected. So that's one issue that people weren't really thinking about when they created the universal mass vaccination program. It was just, let's stop this one disease. And if we can do it for this disease, let's do it for this one. Let's do it for this one. Let's do it for this one. But we forget it's kind of like its own ecosystem when you think of how disease works. And the fact that kids get it actually helps adults continue to have that support to not get it later on. So not only do we have research that shows that experience with these particular illnesses actually protect you from other diseases later on, like having the wild infection will keep you from disease later on. We have that kind of research, but also we realize we all depend on each other with these types of diseases to keep everyone safe, because they work in a cycle. And so we have all these unintended consequences as soon as you interrupt that cycle. So we mass vaccinate for measles, and now we have a generation of women who are not are able to protect their infants. And so now we've got infants that are exposed. Or we mass vaccinate a group of kids for chickenpox, and now we've got 20-year-olds that are all getting it because their immunity is wearing off and they're having complications from it. And now we have this crazy shingles, epidemic essentially that's happening. So I think a lot of times you have to step back from whatever the one particular vaccine you're thinking of, and it's so simple. It's just going to stop that disease. Why wouldn't you want that? And we have to look at kind of like the bigger picture. And sometimes the broad objective view of this is very complex. And it was all just like our immune system. I mean, I don't even feel like scientists understand how our immune system works. It's so complicated. It's really hard to replicate what nature has created.
They understand. They actually understand pretty well how it works. They have very little understanding of how vaccines affect the immune system.
But I mean, I'm just now seeing new data on breast milk and how they're finding stem cells in breast milk. And it's taken them 60, 70 years of medical science to even figure that out. And my point is just that the way nature creates things is very complicated, and it all everything has a purpose kind of. So when you look at even the environment, the idea of what's happening with bees, and the idea that if the population of bees is reduced significantly, it will literally affect the entire system. People don't understand. I feel like it's the same. It's an analogy for kind of how our body works. Yeah. And so the intervention process, whether it's vaccines or another medicine, intervening typically causes something else to pop up because it's how our body responds to the interruption of what the natural process was. Right. So I kind of think like in general, when we look at medical interventions, we have to be so careful about the long-term idea. And then because they're not data testing long-term before they unveil these things, we don't often know these things until it's too late. And at that point, we're sort of dependent now. So then the idea is just more doses or more of it, or new vaccines to counter the unintended consequence. So I think that's a broader conversation that people need to have when they understand this idea of natural infection and disease, is that there's kind of there is a science to nature as it works, and intervening is causing some of the things that we see outside of just the side effects. Outside of that, we're now seeing the lack of exposure and protection in later years as well.
Yeah, we don't know what that's gonna do. I like this question about someone is in a college biology class and everyone tested themselves for meningococcal disease in their nose to see if they were a carrier. And if you missed our episode on that, 10, 20, sometimes even 40% of people carry meningococcal bacteria in their nose. So you test it and you're a carrier, so you want to know if you have to worry about infecting your children or infecting others. The answer is no. You don't have to worry about infecting others. So many people are carriers for meningococcal germs, and virtually will never pass it around to anybody. I will also say that I don't think science really knows for sure exactly how that process works and how people pass it on and how risky are carriers. So for a lot of this, we just don't know, or maybe I don't know. Maybe someone knows, but chime in here if you know the answer to that. But in general, I mean, again, look around you in any room. 10% of the people there have meningococcal disease in their nose. Are you going to worry about them? Probably not. Because it's harmless in most cases.
I like this question from Casey. What do you say to someone who's immunocompromised who feels that everyone around them should be vaccinated to protect them so that they stay well? Because we see this argument a lot, right? Immunocompromised. We've been one of the ones that talked about comparing, if we want to do apples to apples, the idea of vaccine compromised and immunocompromised. And that's a group that never really gets discussed or doesn't have a voice in this debate, unfortunately. But the one that you hear about a lot is immunocompromised. And the idea that everyone needs to be vaccinated in the community to protect this, handful of people that, as you've said, are really exposed to danger everywhere, with all types of things, not just these handful of things that we vaccinate for. And what's your thought on that as it relates to to somebody who's immunocompromised who says, you know what, I need you all to be vaccinated so that you protect me or protect my child.
Right. What I find interesting in a lot of ways on this is, first of all, if all kids caught chickenpox and measles and rubella when they were young and mumps, if everyone caught those diseases and had, natural immunity, then even when you become immunocompromised later from cancer or taking steroids or chemotherapy, you actually still retain all that natural disease immunity if you got the natural immunity and had natural exposures along the way. So in essence, by eliminating all these natural childhood diseases through the vaccination process, and no one has good lifelong natural immunity anymore, we've now created that risk for people who do become immunocompromised later, kind of interestingly. So now that we're stuck with this situation, kind of what does that mean? First of all, most people who are immunocompromised have already had all their vaccines, so they would actually have vaccine-induced immunity. Even if they're parts of their immune system that are low, they're still going to have a lot of their vaccine-induced immunity. So they're going to be pretty well protected anyway. And so I don't see this as a risk that's worth forcing everyone to vaccinate or to tell you that you have a social responsibility to vaccinate, because by me telling you it's mandated or you should do it, what if you're one of the 1 in a million that has anaphylactic shock? Or what if you're one in 1,000 that has a seizure reaction? What if you develop some serious, allergic disorder from vaccines? All vaccines have risk. And because of that, I think you can't mandate it on people. And I would also say that, if you're severely immunocompromised and you are in big danger from catching diseases, you're not out in public anyway, because you'll catch strep throat, you'll catch mono, you'll catch all kinds of causes of pneumonia that are not vaccine related, lots of meningitis that's not vaccine related. You can catch all kinds of things out in public if you're severely immunocompromised that vaccines don't even protect us from. So when you're in that situation, you're not in school, you're not out and about. And so I think, in my opinion, there are way, way, way more people that have suffered serious vaccine reactions that are now vaccine compromised that deserve to be in school and be allowed in public. Way more of those than there are severely immunocompromised that are in a state where they're put at risk by going out in public. So I think, again, we don't have to separate. Everyone can have the same rights and can work together and learn together and play together.
What about in your practice? How many immunocompromised people?
None.
Do you typically have?
I don't have any.
How many have you had? Like, if you could kind of think over your 20 years, like, what would you say would be in the category of immunocompromised would fit in there?
I don't remember any patients that I've had on chronic daily steroids for like a severe immune disorder where they were compromised by taking steroids. The 3 kids I've had with leukemia have never came into my office for the couple of years that they were getting chemotherapy because they're cared for by their oncologist. So they were never in my office, and when they finally came back for pediatric care with me, they were no longer immunocompromised. So I've never been in that situation.
What about vaccine compromised?
Oh yeah.
How many would you say?
I've personally seen many hundreds, and I've talked to families where when you include all their other family members I've talked to, I'd say, several thousand people that I've personally listened to their story of vaccine reaction.
How many, a typical pediatrician, like in our nation, let's say, how many immunocompromised people do you think that they would have in their practice at any given time?
I know. I mean, like some of the big groups near me where there's 10 pediatricians and it's a huge office and there's tons of kids coming through. Yeah, I mean, they probably do have a few.
Like as in 3 or 4? Are we looking at 20, 50?
I don't know, like maybe 1 per pediatrician, not every day, but just in their general practice. And maybe at the most 1. And so,
out of how many does a pediatrician typically have in a practice?
Well, they'll see 40, 50 kids a day.
No, I mean like
out
of their
like
clientele.
A few thousand. Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out exactly how common this is, because this is really used all the time
right.
as if this is a real risk, and this risk is everywhere. But yeah, I've never personally come across someone in that condition, any child, any parent that I've known of that. I mean, I know that they are out there. I know there are kids that have undergone cancer and different, serious types of transplants and things that put them in that condition. But for the amount of injuries that I'm seeing on the other side of this, it really does not seem totally comparable. And so we talked about in the Senate hearing podcast about the guy who represented the immunocompromised people. And he said there were about 250,000 across the nation, adults and children.
Right.
Which means I'm guessing that, the rate of children is probably lower in that. And that's, when you think about how many millions of people that we have, it's really not a lot. Not enough to say that you have to force laws removing exemptions because these are the people that you have to protect, especially not when you're eliminating the voice of all the vaccine compromised.
Yeah.
The fact that part is not part of this equation, is not part of the debate. I don't know how these people don't have a voice.
Because the vaccine compromised are the most invisible, disabled portion of our society because no one believes you exist.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They are the single most invisible, disabled portion of the population. That is 100% true.
Right.
Deep thoughts with Dr. Bob.
Yeah, I know.
No, but really,
Saturday Night Live.
It's serious. That is.
It is. It's very sad.
These kids are disabled on different
tragedy.
levels. Yeah, on different levels, they're disabled and they are completely invisible. They are voiceless. And isn't it just awful that the parents of these kids that are trying to fight for them are the ones that are vilified in this? I mean, the article that you get that coverage on that kid who has cancer, who may have been exposed to someone. They weren't actually exposed, but they may have been. And so this is a cause. Let's have those exemptions stricter. Nobody's talking about all the people that were exposed, but exposed to vaccine injury. And there needs to be more people. It's very
inconvenient. It's just too inconvenient for our mainstream medical system and our government to even get, grasp or even take a look at it. It's just because if they did, where would that go?
I like Jessica's question. Are you going to?
Yeah, well, here's a quick question, April. Where can I find all disease numbers and numbers of vaccine injuries? The NVIC is probably, I think, has the best data on that. If you go to nvic.org and just search each of their diseases or vaccines, or just Google search NVIC MMR vaccine, statistics or something. You snacking? Okay.
Well, I didn't have breakfast today, guys.
So, NVIC, each of their vaccine, it's like the summary page or something. It's wonderful statistics. Like at the touch of a finger, you'll get it right from the NVIC. A great.
NVIC is such a good source for information. They work so hard on updating information from all the different states. I get people messaging me a lot of times for things like I don't have the answer for, and I always redirect them. NVIC is just such a great resource. So make sure and visit them.
I see Jessica's question. We've kind of sort of covered that.
Well, I'll repeat it because she asked it again earlier on something else before we came here.
Okay.
Her question's basically, we had an interview with Dr. Thomas Cowan on his book, Vaccines, Autoimmunity, and the Changing Nature of Childhood Illness. Mm-hmm. I don't remember what episodes there were. We have 2 episodes with him. It's definitely worth checking out if you haven't. But in the book, he's basically talking about something that we've all heard, that there's a benefit to the natural exposure to some of these diseases, and that it actually prevents certain diseases later in life. It helps us with immune system strength and cancer prevention and things like that. And so this question from Jessica says, what happens now, basically, that because of the mass vaccination campaigns, there's not exposure to these things anymore. And we're not basically able to offer these childhood illnesses to our children to allow them the opportunity to go through them and then give them the benefit of what this illness provides them. And unfortunately, that is a real circumstance that we're in, and it's a reality.
But it's such a foreign concept to doctors to purposely allow children to go through a disease. I mean, that's like speaking that's like an alien language. We would have no idea how to even process that possibility, again, because we are trained every single disease you could possibly catch is bad. And if we have a way to prevent that disease, that's good. And
Well, that's kind of like the previous theory too, that everything needs to be treated with antibiotics.
Right.
And but I'm seeing like a little pullback on that now.
Yeah. You're right.
It's taken this long for people to kind of go, okay, maybe it's okay. Or fever, for example. It used to always be treat the fever. Now you're starting to see a few more doctors speak up about the benefits of fever. So maybe over time, there will be kind of a collective shift in the understanding of certain diseases are necessary or are beneficial and can be managed in a way that is not going to be dangerous, but also gives the benefit. Like, I feel like the medical establishment on some levels, it was always intervene. That's kind of like the number one response to anything as it relates to a disease or an illness or a response to a disease or illness. But I am seeing, not just in the holistic community, I've seen some things going around where they're talking about, you know what, you don't maybe need to treat the fever and let's let the fever do its job. And I think if we start to see that trend continue, then maybe people will work their way. But it's going to take a long time. And it is hard for some of us who have children who are at age-appropriate time where they should be catching some of this stuff, and it's not available to them. And they're basically going to risk going through all their childhood without exposure, and then the possibility of exposure later. That's the question that you said some people ask you. Is it more risky for them to get it later? What do we do at that point? I mean, it's not even an option to have our kids exposed to some of these things.
And Crystal kind of asks an interesting follow-up. Can you get exposed to the vaccine strains of these diseases and then develop some good natural immunity lifelong through contact from vaccine strains? And I would say for the most part, no. I mean, really the main way you would get exposed to someone's vaccine strain is if they caught the live version of the infection from the vaccine and then became contagious. That's the main way these are shed, but that doesn't happen often enough. And then, the vaccines don't shed enough to give everyone like useful protection. So I think that's kind of not a valid. You're not going to get protection from that.
I just want to say hi to Kelly. You know who you are, and I love you. My prayers are with you.
Question about tetanus. We are going to do a tetanus episode, and if we had more energy today, that was maybe one of the things we were thinking of doing. Was tetanus, but we don't
have more energy today.
We will do a tetanus episode coming up because of that tetanus case that we just had.
What about Mike's question about some of these?
Can I just say the fatality rate from tetanus, if you are not vaccinated and you actually come down with tetanus, the fatality rate is about 11%. All right. And if you are exposed to a serious, severe wound, you can get a tetanus immunoglobulin shot to prevent tetanus from taking hold. We'll go over more of that
on the tetanus
episode.
I was just say what Mike said about how we're not catching these things. We did, I know, but each one of these people deserves acknowledgement, my friend.
Have to start doing shorter answers if we're going to get.
And that's on you. Okay, so
on me.
Yeah, so it says with many of us not immune to these things, but it says what kind of complications can occur. We just talked about chickenpox, but what kind of complications can occur if we're getting this stuff as adults in other things?
Well, we talked about mumps complications already, and really,
what about other things? Like, what about pertussis? What about?
No, you're not going to have more adult complications from pertussis. We're not catching polio. You're not going to have more adult complications from pneumonia unless you're an elderly. If you're an elderly person, pneumonia will be more serious.
One thing I'll say about measles is I looked into the Amish outbreak, and they were unvaccinated, but the adults did not have wild protection. I mean, they didn't have wild exposure to wild measles, so they didn't have natural protection and a natural immunity. So there were a few babies and there were adults that caught it because they had been living here for the last 40, 50 years. So many of these were in their 30s, and they had never been exposed to measles. So they were unvaccinated, but did not have natural immunity. So they did not pass that to their children, so that there were babies that were affected. But what was interesting was the hospitalization rate was still ridiculously low. Like there were maybe 2 or 3 cases out of 400. So with all the adults that were still catching it, there weren't a lot of complications even as an unvaccinated adult. So I found that interesting because in a separate outbreak where it was a vaccinated population of adults, the hospitalization rate was 33%. So 33% compared to 8%. That to me kind of spoke to maybe there being potentially even an increased likelihood of complication as being previously vaccinated with the measles vaccine versus being unvaccinated as an adult and having exposure. So that's something that I find kind of interesting. We see these higher hospitalization rates and outbreaks, but we also see a lot of previously vaccinated adults getting it. And so unvaccinated adults, according to what I've read, there's still a low complication rate. So it's basically just agreeing with what you were saying earlier, according to what data says, is that there's not that much of a risk.
Right. There's a vitamin K question, not about vaccines, but we said you could ask us anything, I guess.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, vitamin K, there's the shot you can get at birth, or you can take oral drops, so you can do nothing. I don't want to get too much into vitamin K, but, do we want to answer that question?
You've already started, so now you must.
So basically, vitamin.
Well, what's the hesitation on answering the question?
It's a long explanation.
Can you do the succinct
I don't want to give that kind of medical advice over this.
Not advice.
But basically, you can get oral drops. You can buy them online. They're not prescription. And if you're cared for by a midwife, they can tell you the dose. I think a lot of my patients get an oral vitamin K dose instead of the shot. That's kind of their choice that they make. With our kids, we did the oral vitamin K with one kid. No, we did the shot with one kid. Then we did oral vitamin K with the second kid. Then we did the vitamin K shot with the third kid. We kind of went back and forth. And I don't know. Is it even necessary? That's hard to say. I don't know. Maybe we do a whole episode on that.
So Erica's question about pertussis is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
She's saying that, a lot of people acknowledge that the pertussis portion of the DTaP or Tdap vaccine is not great. And so that's even more reason why people need to have it for this cocooning idea around people that have new babies and whatnot. But we've talked about that recently. This idea of cocooning was a theory that was put out, and there just is not data to support that it works. There's no data to really show that that it's going to protect the infant because of asymptomatic transmission. There's no way that you'll know you're not passing it to an infant that you were just recently vaccinated, and you're still carrying the pertussis bacteria. You're around the baby thinking that you're protected, the false sense of security, and you might be direct exposure to that child. And then I found some state data recently relating to women in pregnancy and the amount of babies that were therefore confirmed cases of pertussis later, and you'll be shocked to find out those numbers, but I'm not going to tell you now. We'll talk about it later. We'll see. I'll do the mom thing. We'll see.
I was looking at the time. It's 10 o'clock.
Nobody cares about the time.
I know. No, but we have to.
Did you hear what I said?
10:30.
Yeah. Did you hear what I said?
Okay.
Well, I said, we'll see.
Okay.
You know how, as a mom thing, when somebody goes, we'll see, that basically always means no. It's just you don't want to say no because you don't want to hear, the kid freak out about it.
So someone's kid is going to be 1 in a few days. They're not keen on getting a blood draw for checking anemia. Should you do the anemia check? I'll leave that between you and your doctor. So things, at least here's more.
How much different would things be if mothers had the natural infections and breastfed for at least a year or more? I mean, I think that's, breastfeeding is a. I just spoke with somebody at the Department of Public Health yesterday. I'm not going to go into that, but I'll save that for later. But she did agree with me about breastfeeding and how it actually increases the immune system response, not just passing direct antibodies for that one particular infection, but it creates an enhanced immune system response to all infections. And breastfeeding is something, and this is her, who's a very, very pro-vaccine, was admitting that there absolutely is that added immune system benefit and disease protection passing from moms. Unfortunately, from what I found in the United States, I think we're at 11%. In some of these states, we're at 11% of breastfeeding up until 6 months, which is extremely low. And I think there is some truth to the exposure and spread of disease and how it relates to breastfeeding. And that should be something our CDC is really focusing on, so we educate people on how that can stop the spread of infection. Because if we're looking for a healthier society, then that's what we should be looking for. And we did an episode, I think it's 18, all on breastfeeding.
Okay. Right.
I feel like you're rushing me. Why are you rushing me?
Well, what are a few of the best studies, articles you would show a friend if you're trying to convince them that not vaccinating is safe? Yeah, so you're trying to convince them that raising an unvaccinated child is safe. Yeah, what are the best articles? I would say, gosh, I don't know. I mean, our podcast kind of covers that some. I think in general, you can show them how the very low numbers of disease statistics as far as fatalities from these diseases, and how in many cases fully vaccinated kids are catching these diseases. We have these information on some of our podcasts or our website. I wouldn't say there's not an article I can show you that I know of. I think you're gonna have to basically show them the data.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at Jordan.
Okay.
Jordan, but Melissa, how do you get your bangs so straight? I told you. See, listen, the reason I mentioned the bangs is because funny. If you go to the Middle Ground episode, oh my gosh, I'm like, is this sunlight that's on me? I look like I'm like glowing. This is cool. If you go to the Middle Ground episode on Jubilee's production YouTube site, so many of these negative comments were about, it's fine, no, were about my bangs. I'm not kidding you guys. Like, I was literally a target of bang bullying. Yeah. And what I thought was so interesting about that is like, can you all focus on the topic at hand, please? Which is like what we are saying, not focus on something like that. But that's why I mentioned it in the podcast. And Jordan, thank you. How do I get these things so straight? It's called going to your person and getting them cut.
You don't cut them yourself. You don't fix them yourself.
No way.
Cheryl loves to do that.
They're in that.
Like she'll like try to fix it, and then it's like
no, I have to.
I think it's cute.
I go every couple of. I'd say every month or two I'll go in between like a haircut and she'll just do a quick trim on there. But Jordan, I just love you for saying that.
Someone got Julietta post-viral ataxia from a viral illness where you basically have problems walking after you've caught a virus. And then it resolves, but this person's worried about getting vaccinated with live virus vaccines because then purposely giving your child 3 or 4 live viruses in an injection, could that then induce post-viral ataxia? That is possible. That is possible. And they ask if that's enough for a medical exemption. I don't know. That'd be kind of up to your doctor. I don't know that for me that I would consider that enough for a medical exemption personally, but I think that is enough of an issue to say that, yeah, if you got live virus vaccines, you could suffer a recurrence of the post-viral ataxia. It's possible, but I don't know if I could.
Melissa, are you going to have Melissa is saying, are you going to have any more doctors or specialists on your podcast? Of course we are. We're going to keep it coming. We're going to keep bringing super interesting people because I'm sure you're tired of our voices by now. Wait, stop. And I want to say hi from Maine, Oceana, hi from Texas, Hannah, hi Amber, hi from Illinois, hi from Virginia, hi from New York. Greetings from Cardiff. I just love that people are checking in with where they're listening from, and hello to all of you. I love you guys.
I like Denis. What's a good example to help others unlearn the misinformation saying vaccine-free children are dirty?
And that kind of goes with that last question about what studies would you show to prove that not vaccinating is safe? Where, I mean, and again, it's not about studies that show not vaccinating is safe is kind of maybe the wrong way to say it, but the kids that are unvaccinated are not dangerous.
Right.
In other words.
Right. And I think you have to make it personal. You have to like basically, here are my children, get to know my children and me. If it's a stranger, then I don't know. But if they're a friend or a family member or a neighbor, you really want to create relationships so they can kind of get to know your family and just see firsthand that your children are regular children and they get to know you and kind of learn how intelligent you are, and then you can start to influence them more. So I think a lot of this convincing will be just through the relationship. Now, if you're trying to convince them, maybe where you don't have that opportunity for a relationship, to develop, I think you really have to look at the issues of discrimination. You can use historical examples of how our government and our society has said other people are dirty and contagious and not fit to be around, and that they should not be in our schools, and we need to put them in not have them live in our cities. Because they're dirty and dangerous, contagious. Just use historical examples and then say, look at my child, and look around you. Do you really think that, those people need to be treated that way, the way we've treated people in the past. And I think if you make it about discrimination, it kind of shifts the discussion a little bit. And then again, I really do think using the data that show how the majority of people are vaccinated in large outbreaks is really telling. And in some cases it's not true, but in many cases it is. Sometimes half the people in an outbreak are vaccinated. In the whooping cough outbreak in LA right now, every single person in that outbreak is vaccinated. So that's probably maybe one of the best, another prime argument. But again, it's all about relationships in our society, trying to find a way to form relationships with people instead of separating yourselves from them so they can get to know you better.
I think also if you go back in time a little bit and say, remember when you were in 7th grade? Remember when you were in 5th grade? Did you have any idea if your friends, your family members, anybody, did you have any idea how many vaccines they had? Or if they were vaccinated when you were on your soccer team? Like, did anybody even talk about it? Nobody talked about it, and you weren't looking at people like diseased people. It's only because the media has made that part of the awareness that there is a potential risk that all of a sudden the perspective has completely shifted about normal kid interaction. Like the thing is we have higher vaccination rates now than we've ever had. So when you actually look back at the 80s and 90s, when nobody cared about it, is when most people were missing vaccine doses. So it's like, if you actually want to compare the two, like we're way more vaccinated now. So why all of a sudden is there a fear of people who aren't? You probably were friends with all sorts of people that didn't have vaccine coverage in the 80s and 90s, and you didn't even think about it. In fact, you probably still see them. Now they have kids and whatever, and you have no idea what they've been vaccinated for, what they have natural immunity for, what they have artificial immunity, or what's waned now. Like nobody knows this information. And again, we know the adults have that waning immunity problem. So I just think it's a perspective shift.
Yeah, but that's really key. Two very key things you just said. Number one, you can ask the person, well, you're talking to me right now, and all our childhood vaccines have worn off. So are you worried about being around me? Look around us, all the adults around us at work.
Or should you be worried about that adult, the one who's worried about my kid? Well, I should be worried about you. You too.
Right, but you don't want to antagonize. You want to create a relationship.
Well, I do sometimes.
So you equate it to all these effectively unvaccinated adults who have lost all their vaccine immunity. They're all together. But you're totally right. Take that person you're talking to back to their childhood in the 70s, 80s, 60s, or whatever, and just say, way back then when when these diseases were more common, none of us talked about this. Now the diseases are way down. Why is it an issue now when more are vaccinating and diseases are even further down? They'll say, well, diseases are coming back. Measles is coming back. Then you can tell them, no, it's not. We had lots of measles in the 80s and the early 90s.
Yeah, in 1988, we had 3,700 cases.
There tons of measles in the beginning of the 90s.
I'm like so bright because the light's reflecting.
So we still have measles outbreaks up and down, but it's not coming back. It was never eliminated officially, and you can have that discussion with them. I think once you approach those key points, I think they'll maybe open up a little bit and think, oh yeah, I didn't think about it that way. Hopefully, perspective
is everything. Yeah. But look at this question. This is a good question. Jamie, if my mom had measles, then I have immunity passed to me, but would my daughter have immunity passed to her? Okay, so immunity is not something that you're given that's lifetime long.
Right.
It's really only going to protect you during that first year where you're at risk. And then in your early years, you would be either exposed or in your 6 years old, you would get it yourself. And then you getting it yourself gives you lifetime immunity. You do not get lifetime immunity because your mother passed to you.
Right.
She's passing you passive immunity.
Right. The antibodies you get from your mom through the placenta only last about a year.
And that's the time that you're at risk, which is a good thing. But then that basically leaves you able to be exposed to the actual wild infection at a later time. And then that would give you that lifetime protection. That's an important clarification. Yeah. So that was good.
Rebecca, would you purposely expose someone to measles or mumps? I don't know. I don't know that I would recommend purposeful exposure. What else is interesting here?
Well, what about this one? This is kind of an interesting question. Shelley says, if a child at 10 years old is fully vaccinated minus the flu shot, without incident so far, as far as you know, what are the risks of stopping vaccinations at this point? I mean, I think this is a conversation a lot of people have, like, oh, what would happen kind of at this point? These are such individual...
I'm just reading the question, too.
Because you weren't listening again?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. These are such individual kind of case ideas where you look... I think any decision that you make relating to this, you have to look at a cost-benefit analysis for every single particular disease. I think the problem is that when you typically go to your pediatrician's office, you don't necessarily even know all the diseases your child's being vaccinated for. Sometimes you're just basically signing up for the 2-month appointment. And so you haven't necessarily done the cost-benefit analysis and said, yes, this one I'm definitely worried about, so let's do this one. I'm not concerned with this one because we're breastfeeding and we're at home. This one I am concerned about. That should be the conversation that happens every time you make a vaccine situation, a vaccine discussion or question. It should be based upon cost-benefit analysis. Your child's at 10 right now. What kind of things could they be exposed to that would be still on the schedule that they haven't already gotten? And where would the risk be? And what is the risk of the actual disease? You need to go do that research. You need to go find out what the prevalence is of that particular disease or the potential risk of that vaccine after 10 years of age. This is exactly the kind of decision you should be making before you say yes. And, that's not to say that you won't still say yes. You might still say yes. But this is my big concern with how our well visit appointments work, is that we're not having that kind of informed discussion with our pediatricians before we do it all. And we should be, because you should know exactly what your child's getting and what the prevalence is and where the risks lie and the risks of the vaccine. And then you pick and choose what's important to you and what matters to you in that sense. And we've covered several of the diseases so far. So some of that, you can go see our episodes on that. But it's going to be completely up to you and your trusted doctor or healthcare practitioner about what you worry about, what kind of things you think they could have real exposure to, and where that risk you feel is greater than the risk of the vaccine. This is exactly an individualized, it should be completely individualized.
Yeah, and your individual question is about your 10-year-old. So you've had all the vaccines already. The only thing you would get coming up would be the tetanus whooping cough booster at age 12. And the whooping cough only lasts a couple of years, so it doesn't give you very much benefit at that age. The tetanus booster you would get might give you another 10 years of tetanus boosted tetanus immunity, so you'd have to again talk to your doctor about that.
But you could get a TD instead of
TDAP. You're right. Yeah, you could get a tetanus diphtheria booster and leave out the whooping cough, so there's probably less side effects. But how important is that tetanus immunity? We'll have a whole episode on that. And
then what comes after that?
Then there's meningococcal. We had an episode on that, so you can listen to that. And then there's HPV vaccine that comes along there as well. So that's all you're looking at that age. And again, you can run that through your doctor.
But it's a good point, because people need to be having these kinds of discussions. Don't just blindly accept whatever thing you're being told to give. Have the cost-benefit analysis with each one. Don't just do it because they tell you to do it. If you're going to do it because you believe in it and you believe that it's worth it and you're educated on it, and do that actual research.
Jessica asks, why are there more side effects as adults to live virus vaccines? You're basically risking all the disease side effects from the vaccine. So just like all the diseases make you much sicker and you feel worse as an adult, the vaccine does the same thing. It's all based on side effects of the vaccines, and the diseases mimic each other. So that's why it's a lot worse in adults than children, just because our immune system is different. Because these diseases weren't designed to occur in adulthood. These diseases were designed to occur in childhood, when our immune systems are better naturally designed to fight them off and handle them easily.
I still see a light in the background.
It's right over me though. So yeah, put my head right there. Right. People say the diseases are mutating because people who don't vaccinate are allowing the diseases to spread around our society and then mutate. And pro-vaxxers use that as an argument against people who don't vaccinate, that we're causing all these mutations and the germs are becoming worse. That's not true at all. It's actually the vaccine pressure, the way the vaccines are trying to get rid of these diseases, especially whooping cough. The whooping cough germ is responding by mutating in a way that makes the vaccine less effective. And we're already seeing that. And we actually, we did a podcast on that, but we haven't posted it yet. So
which one? What were you saying?
I know.
I'm trying to
see,
summarize.
How does it feel?
I'm speaking your language.
So we're going to post a pertussis vaccine update, in which we have actually a whole breakdown on how the pertussis germs are mutating because
we haven't posted
of
that.
the
What
vaccine.
Was that? What was that?
We haven't posted that yet. We changed it, so it's
right. What was that on though? What was the episode that it was on at the update.
We just made it its own episode.
Its own episode. That's right. That's right.
What else we got here?
How about this one? I went down quite a bit. How come our pediatrician never told us not to give Tylenol with a vaccine? We're gonna do an episode, I think, about that because there's a lot of interesting new research about Tylenol. But why do you think that was such a universal recommendation given to pediatricians to say, if your child's upset after a vaccine, give Tylenol?
Well, pediatricians, we want to fix everything, and if there's a medication that can help, we're gonna prescribe it. So we are trained. Every hospitalized kid, every kid we see in the office, you got to treat the fever, you got to reduce the fever, you got to reduce the pain and achiness. We want to make the kids feel better, even if that's not good for them, to make them feel better in that situation. We're just taught that. So with vaccines, especially to prevent high fevers, to reduce maybe the risk of a febrile seizure, we're taught to totally medicate with these fever reducers and pain relievers after vaccination. And I agree, we've probably learned by now it's not a good idea to give Tylenol because that might interfere with your ability to detox the vaccine. So that's why I never recommend Tylenol anymore. And I don't really recommend ibuprofen either, unless your kid's maybe just super miserable from a vaccine. Then it might be useful.
I mean, I think a lot of times when they say give Tylenol, it's, oh, your baby is sore. They're feeling pain. This is kind of what you hear a lot. If they're grumpy or they're crying, it's probably just because they're a little pain. Give them a little Tylenol, they're fine. And I think, of course, it's missing the bigger picture of why some kids have reactions, which is not about soreness at the injection site. I can't stand that argument.
Yeah.
Soreness at the injection site. It could be from brain inflammation. It could be the immune activation events happening inside and what that triggers in the body. They're not able to communicate this. So just giving Tylenol to like numb their feeling of topical pain is not addressing the issue. And then on the other side of it, that there's a risk that glutathione is being interfered with when Tylenol is there, and that's the thing you need to help detoxify. So it's a two-layered issue, but I feel like the Tylenol is used to sort of just dumb down vaccine reactions. Oh, if they're fussy, just give them Tylenol. Like it's just something minor.
Yeah.
Of course it hurts when you prick your skin and you're just a poor little baby. And it's like it's not about the pricking of the skin. It's about what's happening on the inside of the body.
Yeah.
And it's so crucial that people start paying attention to how their child reacts and is not just brushing it off as something that doesn't mean anything because their doctor just said give them Tylenol, that's why they're fussy. Like when you see some of these kinds of reactions, you'll realize that you start to learn how the body responds, and we have to be very vigilant about this.
Sarah asks, is there a significant difference in getting baby vaccines on schedule versus waiting to start until 2 years of age?
It's a good question.
It is a good question. I mean, I think getting any vaccine at any age can be risky for anybody. I mean, even getting one vaccine, even spreading your vaccines apart, there's always going to be vaccine risk. I would say waiting until kids are 2 years old might reduce the risk of severe neurological injury. Maybe. We don't know. We don't have great data on that. I
know there's a website called 2 and Talking, which kind of has a schedule based upon waiting until your child is 2, and you can go. You want to let her know?
Yeah.
You can't do that one. We have a guest coming in for our next podcast who is here, so I'll just take over for a second. There's a website called 2 and Talking, and it discusses the fact that wait till your child is at a certain point developmentally so that they'll be able to handle the different things coming in the system at that point. And then, of course, you are eliminating several of the doses at that point by waiting until 2. I don't know who runs the website, but I thought it was interesting. And it is a theory that some people have used before. And there are so many specific questions on here. By the way, we'll go back and we'll answer some of these later. We'll be able to go and respond to each of these comments. Like a hi from Alaska.
Wow, sweet. I was just at Alaska with my family over the summer. Wonderful. Let's see. Do we think, how about we give like 10-second answers to every question? You want to do that? Okay. Do you think we'll see the same scenario with overuse of antibiotics will we see overuse of vaccines as the same effect we've seen from overuse of antibiotics? Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. We might see more mutations in diseases as we do more vaccines, but I'm not really sure. Do you think they'll do a placebo study? No. What else?
How about Dr. Bob? Are you going to do a data study like Dr. Paul?
You know what? Yeah, people have asked me to do that. I should do that. Yeah, that would be cool. To have someone come in and do a complete chart review study on my, compare my unvaccinated kids to partially vaccinated kids to fully vaccinated kids, and then look at their outcomes. Yeah, I'm interested. That might be a possibility. Vaccines and traveling with young children. That's complicated, but in general, if you're traveling anywhere in the world where tourists would normally go, then I think your disease risk is little different than your general life living here in the U.S. anywhere where tourists would normally go. So I don't think you really have to do vaccines you wouldn't normally have done living here if you're going to go anywhere where tourists would normally go. Yeah, there might be a little bit more risk with measles in some countries. There might be a little bit more risk with certain diseases, and you can go over that with your doctor.
Here's a good question.
But just in general.
Related to this, it says, in your experience with vax-free children in your practice, are you seeing them as healthier, less sick visits, et cetera, less neurological disorders?
Yeah, I'd say it is my general impression, without having scientifically studied it yet, that, yeah, my families that don't vaccinate, just they seem to handle colds better. They seem to have fewer complications from colds and flus. They seem to get sick a little less often, or if they do get sick, again, they handle it better. I tend to see them less. I can't say that I've really studied long-term outcomes or tried to observe that, but I'd say in general, their immune systems seem healthier in how they handle all the regular childhood diseases that come their way, which is kind of ironic.
And not super frequent visits, right?
No, not frequent visits. They're not sick much, or they're not sick enough to come in and be seen. And anything? I
want to mention the Rockland situation that's happening. You can not pay attention and look for more questions. Okay. So if you guys were paying attention yesterday, Friday, there was a temporary injunction put in on the ban on unvaccinated children that are unvaccinated for measles, specifically in Rockland County, New York. Yeah. So they were sued. The county was sued, and so was Ed Day, who is the county officer that created the ban. They were sued, and the state Supreme Court is going to be now investigating it. But before the investigation, they put the temporary ban, which is amazing because this is going to be before all their religious ceremonies and practices that they have coming up for Passover that are so that this ban would have been keeping them from being able to practice their religion, which is just unprecedented. Yeah. And so it was a huge win, I think, for the fact that this injunction was placed. I have the actual court documents, which I looked through, and I meant to tell you, I think something that's interesting is they mention that the cases in Rockland, I couldn't find this data, it wasn't listed, but they mentioned that the cases in Rockland were more than half adults.
Okay.
So this information has not been placed anywhere. They also mentioned that there are about a third of them that are vaccinated. So I looked for this information, and all they're saying is this is all only unvaccinated kids, and it's all these children, and that's why the ban is on children. But if half of the cases are adults, why are they banning everyone 18 and under?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this whole thing doesn't make sense, but look for the court document. It's really interesting to read through. It talks about where the rights, which particular rights are being so it's great affected.
That they lifted that ban, that the judge ruled it was not right to exclude those kids from society. I just want to comment, thank you, April and Terry. They said they would have moved the lamp too because it was kind of shining behind us.
Are we still talking about the lamp?
Lighting is everything. Well, I'm just going through all of them.
But it says this executive order, they said, basically violates lawful procedure. Yeah. It affects the 14th Amendment rights, which are under protection, and 9th Amendment rights of bodily autonomy, which is interesting. And they said that it's specifically targeting and discriminating against children in Rockland who are unvaccinated due to religious reasons. They talk about that Jacobson versus Massachusetts precedent, which many people don't know this, but it was compulsory vaccination in Massachusetts, but it was for all adults too.
Okay.
And actually, there was a subgroup of youngsters that they did not include because of vulnerability. So even in that case, which is the case they're using as legal precedent to be able to have this kind of control, the same legal precedent they used in California with 277 to prove that they had the ability to pass this kind of law that superseded religious or personal freedoms. They're saying even with that case, it was for adults too. It wasn't just targeting children, and it excluded some children that were at risk. So it didn't force all kids to. And they even say Rockland County, healthy, non-vaccinated children are being targeted. So they're talking about these are healthy kids who do not have measles. And there's a baby Jane Doe who this is on behalf of with the parents, and they said she does not have measles, and so she's at no health risk to anybody else. And they talk about Ed Day coercing vaccination compliance to get to 100%. He's literally shooting for 100% compliance, and that goes against, this mandate goes against and discriminates against these non-vaccinated children. And I thought this was so interesting. It even talks about MMR safety, potential risk there. And it says, it says 25, here we go. It says 25% of the measles cases in Rockland occurred in fully vaccinated individuals, and half of the reported cases were in adults over 18. This is actually in the court documents. And
awesome.
So check this out, because this is a good legal understanding of what's going on.
People can Google search that.
I don't even know how I forget how I came across this, but this is the title of this particular document: Supreme Court of the State of New York, County of Rockland. And this is received April 3rd, 2019. And this is basically a petitioner against Ed Day in his official capacity, the county executive, and the County of Rockland.
Right.
This is what it looks like. Oh, there you go.
Pause.
It's like several pages long.
Right.
And so once this was filed, then shortly after, the injunction was stopped. And this does not mean it's the state Supreme Court decision.
Right.
They will still go to say, but I'm just happy that this is happening and people are standing up for their rights.
Someone asked about fetal DNA and vaccines. Yeah, if you pull up the chickenpox package insert or the hepatitis A package insert, look at the description, you'll actually see fetal DNA and fetal proteins listed in the ingredients. It's right there in black and white. Yes, you can get eczema from vaccines. I see that actually quite a bit. I see people develop eczema right after vaccines, and then it gets worse with subsequent rounds, and that can be a pretty significant problem. Should we wrap it up?
How do you find the breastfeeding episode? It's on the podcast. It's episode number 18.
Okay.
That's for Stacy. Oh, how about Simone? This is a good question about the middle ground. I saw you on the middle ground. Based on your experience, was that video heavily edited? It says the informed immunity side didn't seem to say much regarding data history. Was there a reason for that? Yeah, we do an entire podcast episode on the middle ground experience. Yeah. And you're right. Yes, it was 2.5 hours of data that was cut down into those 14 minutes.
Right.
And they asked us not to use data.
Right.
They specifically said this is not a data-driven conversation. This is supposed to be a heart-to-heart. So we were not able to bring that to the table. Not that we don't have it. We were not able to bring it. Literally, that was told in the interviews before we were even on there.
Yeah, I don't think they edited it in a way that made us look like we were saying something we weren't really saying. They didn't change what we were saying in any way. Although, when I did say like a couple of vaccines work, They left out the part where I then said, but here's the vaccines, that don't prevent the spread and don't work as well. So, but no, I think it was, but they cut tons of stuff out, but they didn't, I guess, misrepresent us.
Right. It wasn't like skewed
editing. There's a lack
editing
of stuff that we also said that they didn't.
Yeah, there was a lot of that.
Right.
Hi, Casey. So somebody asked about the opening song again. I'll say it just here. Listen. Yes, I sing that song. However, that song was recorded back in 2010, I believe, 2008 even, maybe. I did not ask for that song to be on this podcast. That was not my decision, at all. I promise you guys, I am not promoting myself in any way. This was a song I wrote for church that I sing at church. And so I saw a review that thinks it's a little potentially hokey was the word. And I just have a few words for that reviewer, who also thinks I'm a little too passionate and maybe a little too extremist on this issue. go watch the podcast for our stories, and you'll understand why I'm so passionate about this.
Yeah.
But that song, it's hokey. Yeah, it's a positive, uplifting song. It's made for church. That's what it was used for. It was not made for this episode. It was not made for this podcast.
But when I heard it was kind of catchy, and since I listened to other podcasts, they always have like a really catchy kind of musical intro and outro.
I even told him no. I was like, no, I don't want to use this.
And so I thought, this kind of intro is cool, and then the kind of the bridge at the end, and I don't know, I kind of liked it. So yeah,
but it has a good message.
Can I tell him?
Well, no.
Okay.
Also, hi from Poland. Hi, Joanna from Poland. I'm happy that people listen in different places. But I promise I was not trying to add promotion. I mean, I didn't even talk about the fact that I was a singer for like 20 episodes on this thing. That's my other life. That's what I did before I had kids. I still do it, but it's completely unrelated to this. And no, I'm not trying to tie the two together and somehow get, it's not even, it used to be on iTunes. It's not even available anywhere I'm not selling it to anybody. So it's not like that kind of situation, but it was his choice. Right. He forced me to put it on there, and it was made for church. So that's why it's a positive message. Blah, blah, blah.
Forced me to sing the intro to one of our upcoming episodes. So don't miss.
Just wait, you guys.
Can't believe you talked me into that. That was very unexpected. But anyway,
aired.
What was it? What I was going to say? I was just going to say this will be available. This will actually be a podcast. We'll air this, the audio recording of this as an actual podcast in a couple of weeks. So you can go back and listen to this whole Q&A if you want.
I'm gonna go back. I will definitely at least go through all these comments after, and the questions we didn't get to, I'll respond, or Dr. Bob will go through and respond, because there are a lot of comments in here, and I love really being able to communicate back to everybody else.
Hello from Athens, Greece.
Nice.
Hey, Jules. All right. Well,
I love all this. Two and talking. Yeah. There was somebody that said that they have received more information on vaccines in the last couple months than they had in their entire 65 years.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that's because they're listening to the podcast. But I mean, it's true. How else would you know about this stuff? Nobody's giving
and can I say
education.
just thanks everyone for listening, because we had over 60,000 downloads of our podcast in March alone, and we're over 130, including YouTube. We're probably 150,000 downloads of people watching episodes of our podcast. We totally appreciate that. That kind of support is exciting to us. We love that, and it's accelerating. It started off slow, and then each month it's almost like doubling the number of downloads as each month goes by. So I'm excited to see what April has for us.
Not April, the person who we answered her questions already
Thank
earlier.
Thank you very much, April.
April of the month. Yeah, I mean, we already checked there. We get about 2,500 to 3,000 downloads a day. Cool. I mean, think about how many people, you guys, are being touched by this conversation, and how many people need to hear this conversation.
People, are we talking about SB 276? I don't think we're talking about it today.
Not today.
But anyway,
if you're local, keep an eye out for one of our town halls that we're doing. But we got lots of information coming out about that, but we'll try to keep up with a Facebook Live Q&A like this, maybe once every 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, maybe.
We can fit it in just so that we can kind of answer questions.
Shelby reminds us, go find the White House petition that's going around on Facebook asking for a placebo-controlled vaccine safety study with unvaccinated versus vaccinated kids. There's a White House petition going around. We need 100,000 people to sign it. And so watch out for that. And
thanks, Monica, for your compliment. I love all this. I love that you guys are joining us for this. And it was kind of last minute maybe for some of you. And happy Saturday. I know you're spending times with your family. Mm-hmm. And we're going to continue recording another podcast episode that we're going to be sharing soon. Keep an eye out. We'll try to, maybe we'll do 3 episodes next week, because we've got a lot in the queue, and give you, because we've been a little sidelined with what's going on here, so we haven't been recording as much, but we have a few that we've already recorded to get out there. So we try to give you as much content as possible. So a lot of exciting things still coming. I'm sorry, I'm tired today.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
It's been a long several weeks here.
All right, you guys. Well,
but anyway, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and we'll see you later.
Put comments down below if you still there's something that you want to get.
What do we push? We push finish.
Want to get
Here's my
answered. Wait, you're not doing it yet. Okay.
Okay, bye, guys.
Bye.
We're gonna be the peace we wanna see in the world. Yeah.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.